My dog speaks more eloquently, or juxtaposition in Hamilton. One of the things that Miranda does the best in Hamilton is his use of juxtaposition, which is why there's a whole lecture devoted to just his use of juxtaposition. So before you go any further in the lecture, stop, read the lyrics to A Farmer Refuted and One Last Time. For starters, what is juxtaposition? What does this fancy word mean? It's simply the fact of two things being placed together with contrasting effects. In layman's terms, it's when you place two starkly different things next to each other to make a point of the vast differences between them. In Hamilton, we see multiple different types of juxtaposition. We have racial juxtaposition, class juxtaposition, method juxtaposition, and word juxtaposition, being just a couple of the ones that we're going to highlight in this lecture. For starters, we're going to look at racial juxtaposition. Miranda draws attention to how white the founding fathers of our country really were. And one of the ways that he does this is by casting only minorities to play white characters. So most people would recognize George Washington, pictured above. And so by casting Chris Jackson, who is an African-American male, in the role of Washington, Miranda is both drawing attention to how white the founding fathers really were, and he's also using that to make a statement that the role transcends the traditional casting boundaries. By accepting Chris Jackson as George Washington, the audience no longer sees race as the defining characteristic of the father of America. The irony of all of this is that with Miranda playing Hamilton, he's actually of Puerto Rican descent, and so his DNA is probably a little bit closer to Hamilton's than any of the other casts would be to their iconic role. The irony of Miranda playing Hamilton is that as a Puerto Rican descendant, he is actually closer to the genetic DNA of Hamilton than anyone else is to their roles in the show, being that Hamilton was also from the Caribbean. Hamilton, however, is always depicted as a traditional-looking white male, a very good-looking one, and he was often referred to as the most handsome of the founding fathers. Class juxtaposition. There's a distinct schism between the old world and the new world, and Miranda does a fantastic job in emphasizing this by the theme, diction, and style of the old versus the new. We also see this where he uses it to compare the royalty versus the peasants, the wealthy versus the poor, and then the educated versus the laborers. By putting two characters together with contrasting styles like in A Farmer Refuted, which we'll look at shortly, Miranda draws attention to just how massive the differences between the two are. King George serves as a constant reminder of the old ways with his traditional lyrical musical theater style, and it never changes. The notes he sings never even really change. All three of his songs are essentially the same melodies and the same refrains, only the words change. So Miranda uses this to show the fluidity of the Americas and the new people and the new nation versus the tight, rigid structure of the old world and of the monarchy and of Britain in general. Method juxtaposition. So again, he talks about traditional versus modern, old versus new, the old people versus the young people, the establishment versus the people, which is ironic because Hamilton eventually starts to become part of the establishment. This is just another way that Miranda puts two things together to show how different they really are. You also have the North and the South as well. So we see the clash between Hamilton and Jefferson as a constant source of method juxtaposition. Word juxtaposition. Miranda mixes high versus low language and humor. He mixes educated versus daily speak, classic language versus slang. He blends all of these together, and we see this when we look at Hamilton and Burr side by side. Also compare Mulligan and Lawrence and see the difference between the two. We even see these in the allusions that Miranda uses throughout the musical. He flips from classical musical theater references to operas and traditional musical canons. And then in the next line, he's giving us a staple from hip-hop or rap genres. So A Farmer Refuted is a great example of juxtaposition in almost every way possible. Unlike in the musical, these exchanges between Hamilton and Seabury happen via letter and publications. Seabury wrote free thoughts on the proceedings of the Continental Congress under the pen name A.W. Farmer. Seabury was a loyalist living in New York City. Hamilton responds in a series of letters and publications, one of the most famous being The Farmer Refuted. Seabury is eventually arrested and jailed as a loyalist. So listen to the song, pay close attention to the different styles, the flow, tempo, rhythm, rhyme, and word choice between Hamilton and Seabury.
Hear ye! Hear ye! My name is Samuel Seabury, and I present free thoughts on the proceedings of the Continental Congress. Heed not the rabble who scream revolution. They have not your interest at heart.
Oh my God, tear this dude apart.
Chaos and bloodshed are not a solution. Don't let them lead you astray. This Congress does not speak for me. They're playing a dangerous game. I pray the King shows you his mercy. For shame, for shame.
Yeah.
Heed
Have
not
you
the
all
rabble
unravel at the sound of
scream.
screams, but the
Revolution
coming.
they
The
have not
have-nots are
your
gonna win.
interest
Just
at
ask hard
heart.
to listen to you with a straight face.
Chaos and bloodshed
already
are
haunts
not
us.
a
Our
solution.
shouldn't even talk.
Don't
And what
let
about
them
Boston?
lead you
Look at the cost
astray.
and all that we've lost, and you're talking
This
about
Congress does not speak for
My dog
me.
speaks more eloquently
They're
than
playing a dangerous game.
Plainly your mange is
I
the
pray the King shows you his mercy.
Is he in Jersey?
For shame, for the revolution. For shame, for the revolution.
You repeat yourself again, I'm gonna scream. Honestly, look at me, please don't read.
Not your interest.
Don't modulate the key, then not debate with me. Why should a tiny island across the sea regulate the price of tea?
Alexander, please.
Bert, I'd rather be divisive than indecisive. Drop the niceties. Silence!
A message from the King. A message from the King. A message from the King.
So we have two people having a dialogue here, sort of. We have Seabury who starts out and he says the same thing twice, or he tries to. Hamilton makes it very hard for him and eventually he just gives up. The interesting thing though is the way that these two different personalities are being juxtaposed together. Seabury obviously has a much more old world feel to him. You can actually hear the harpsichord playing in the background, which is very different from any of the other music that we've heard so far in the show. Seabury is trying to persuade people, don't listen to the Continental Congress. Obviously he's a loyalist. These people are crazy, they're going to put your lives in danger. And then Hamilton jumps in to refute all of this. And the way he does this is he actually takes Seabury's own words and turns them on his head. Notice how many times their lines actually line up. So Seabury says the sound of screams, and then Hamilton is saying, heed not the rabble who scream revolution. They have not and the have-nots, revolution. Chaos and bloodshed, they talk about Congress. And then he almost switches to a witty retort every single time that Seabury starts speaking. He says, you talk about Congress. The Congress does not speak for me, Seabury says. And Hamilton replies, my dog speaks more eloquently. Says, I pray that the King shows you his mercy. Hamilton's witty retort, is he in Jersey? Again, scream, they say several times. We have the monotony of the tiny island across the sea, again, to refer to the idea of Great Britain. And then Burr intercedes and is trying to say, Alexander, play nice, all right? And then the ensemble breaks in and says, silence, a message from the King. Okay, one last time, we're going to move on. In this song, Washington is telling Hamilton of his plans to step down and asking Hamilton to help him write his farewell address. His stepping aside sets the precedent for the two-term presidential limits. It will not be imposed until much later. However, it is what they referred back to in the idea that, hey, Washington only served 2 terms. It's good enough for him, it's good enough for anybody else. It's a more casual exchange between the two, more reminiscent of history has its eyes on you than something like right-hand man. When Washington is most vulnerable and personal, we see a softer side of him. They start on opposite ends, again juxtaposition, and end up meeting in the middle to write one of Washington's best speeches. You can actually view the full text of the speech here at this link at the bottom of the slide. What is also interesting here is the blending of actual text of the speech and the creative license and speech of Miranda. He blends his own lyrics beautifully with the segments of the actual speech.
Mr. President, you asked to see me.
I know you're busy.
What do you need, sir? Sir?
I want to give you a word of warning.
Sir, I don't know what you heard, but whatever it is, Jefferson started it.
Thomas Jefferson resigned this morning.
You're kidding.
I need a favor.
Whatever you say, sir, Jefferson will pay for his behavior.
Talk less.
I'll use the press, I'll write under a pseudonym. You'll see what I can do to him.
I need you to draft an address.
Yes, he resigned. You can finally speak your mind.
No. He's stepping down so he can run for president.
Good luck defeating you, sir.
I'm stepping down, I'm not running for president.
I'm sorry, what?
One last time. Relax, have a drink with me one last time. Let's take a break tonight, and then we'll teach him how to say goodbye. To say goodbye, you and I.
No, sir,
I
why?
want to talk about neutrality.
Sir, with Britain and France on the verge of war, is this the best
I
time?
want to warn against partisan fighting. But pick up a pen, start writing. I want to talk about what I have learned, the hard-won wisdom I have earned.
As far as the people are concerned, you have to serve. You could continue to serve.
No, one last time. The people will hear from me one last time. And if we get this right, we're gonna teach them how to say goodbye. You and I.
Mr. President, they will say you're weak.
No, they will see we're strong.
Your position is so unique.
So I'll use it to move them along.
Why do you have to say goodbye?
If I say goodbye, the nation learns to move on. It outlives me when I'm gone. Like the scripture says, everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. They'll be safe in the nation we've made. I want to sit under my own vine and fig tree, a moment alone in the shade, at home in this nation we've made. One last time, one last time.
Though in reviewing the incidents of my administration, I am unconscious of intentional error. I am nevertheless too sensible of my defects, not to think it probable that I may have committed many errors. I shall also carry with me the hope that my country will view them with indulgence. That after 45 years of my life dedicated to its service with upright zeal, the faults of incompetent abilities will be consigned to oblivion, as I myself must soon be to the mansions of rest. I anticipate with pleasing expectation that retreat in which I promised myself to realize the sweet enjoyment of partaking in the midst of my fellow citizens, the benign influence of good laws under a free government, the ever favorite object of my heart. Happy
labors and dangers one last time. Teach 'em how to say goodbye. You and I. Going home. History has its eyes on you, yeah. We're gonna teach 'em how to say goodbye. Teach 'em how to say goodbye. We'll say goodbye. Say goodbye one last
I don't know about you, but I get chills every time I listen to that. So why don't we look at some of the lyrics of One Last Time? Again, we start out at the beginning and we have Hamilton and Washington, who are an interesting juxtaposition in themselves. You have the strictly regimented military man along with this kind of loose cannon, if you will, as a intentional pun on Hamilton, who stole cannons in the beginning of the Revolutionary War. So they're sitting here talking about Jefferson stepping down. And again, one of the more interesting rhymes in this entire show is the fact that he says, "I'll write under a pseudonym. You can see what I can do to him." So pseudonym, do to him. Pretty interesting rhyme going on right there, right? So let's look at some of the rhyme scheme going on here. Washington actually has some exact rhyme. He says, "No, he's stepping down so he can run for president. I'm stepping down. I'm not running for president." Then let's look at his refrain. "One last time, relax, have a drink with me. One last time. Let's take a break tonight, and then we'll teach him how to say goodbye, you and I." So we've got time, which is going to be our A, me, which is going to be a B, time again, an exact rhyme, A, tonight, it's going to be a new one, so that's going to be C, and then we end up with goodbye, goodbye, and I, so D, D, D. So the rhyme scheme winds up being A, B, A, C, D, D, D. Pretty interesting, right? All right, so let's move on to, "If I say goodbye, the nation learns to move on. It outlives me when I'm gone. Like the scripture says, everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid." So this is actually a very interesting part from the Bible. The interesting thing is it can come from 3 potential spots in the Bible. Washington actually referenced it almost 50 different times in his letters and his writing. So it was one of his favorite Bible verses. It could be an allusion to Micah chapter 4, verse 4. Could be 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 25, or Zechariah chapter 3, verse 10. We don't really know which one he was alluding to, but it's mentioned in all 3 of those verses. And then we start switching into the farewell address, which the juxtaposition and the way that this is presented is absolutely brilliant. Hamilton, was part of the team that wrote the speech. So it's Hamilton's words, and so obviously he starts out speaking them, and then it moves into Washington almost takes over, and his voice is the one that we hear last. So it's Hamilton's words coming out of Washington's mouth as he kind of is faded in. So it's that juxtaposition of the writer and the speaker, the behind the scenes versus what's actually seen. So let's just take a quick look at that first verse and kind of pick it apart, because I know this is some more archaic type dialogue that we're not really used to. And so he says, "Though in reviewing the incidents of my administration, I am unconscious of intentional error, I am nevertheless too sensible of my defects not to think it probable that I may have committed many errors. I shall also carry with me the hope that my country will view them with indulgence." So what is he trying to say here? He's saying that, I'm looking back over my time as president, and although I didn't mean to make any mistakes, I know myself and I know that I'm human and I know that I had to have made something along the way. And so he's saying, and along with that knowledge, I also carry with me the hope that when these errors are viewed, that they will be viewed as it was an honest mistake. So pretty wise words, kind of how we would all like to be viewed, right? So, questions, things to think about. What are the different types of juxtaposition that you see in both of these songs? And in looking at the words or the lyrics, what's one example that specifically stands out? What is the point that Miranda is trying to make in using all these different types of juxtaposition? And how effectively does Miranda juxtapose the actual speech or published works with his own? So your discussion questions, you need to pick another song that we're not covering in the lecture, so it'll come out of the additional lyrics file, and give 2 examples of juxtaposition of any nature and why you think Miranda chose to use them in 300 plus words. You'll then need to respond to 2 other classmates' posts and 150 plus words each.